Hi, everybody. Welcome to this talk about supercharging your learning web components with JavaScript. How this talk started is because I started my journey to learning web components some years ago, and I noticed that I started using the same or similar syntax that I had in Apex in JavaScript. It's like, when you jump from C maybe to object orientation like Java, so you start using structured code. Similar. Oh, sorry.
It's very sensitive, isn't it?
Oh, sorry. So what happened to me is, oops, this is the light. Very good. Yeah. So, what happened to me is when I moved to Linear Web Components, I started using a similar syntax that I use in Apex in Linear Web Components. And after many years of looking at some other code, I kind of started picking little here and there little snippets of code that made me realize that my code would have been better like with the native functions or features that we have in JavaScript. But this is just a journey, isn't it? Like I'm still in my journey. I'm learning a lot, and this is some tips that I've been picking out of my my path, and I hope you can. I hope they are useful for you as well. Okay, I am Edith Valencia Martinez. I'm a senior software engineer, and I am also a certified Salesforce developer. I work in a very cool consultancy that is called Design It. It's in the southwest of Bristol, and this is one of my pictures of Bristol. And I'm also, as Todd mentioned, I'm a coach at Women. We teach people who identify as female to code in Salesforce. Oh, this is not gonna work. Okay, for this talk, I will be using an app that I built especially for this talk. And we are going to review the app right now. I will introduce it. Okay, the app is similar to what you get from the Apex test history. So basically, you have a summary of all of the tests that you have in your org on the top, like when it was run, the outcome, how many tests pass, how many tests fail, and each test is on the bottom in a table. It's here, we have tests. We have in red the ones that fail. And I also added here a drop-down that lets you select the type of test that you are looking at. For example, maybe I want just this type of test, and the data on the bottom is going to change. Oops. And I also added a chart here that is going to give me, for each type, how many tests pass and how many tests fail. And I also added a feature here using the library that you can download the chart on the format that you want. Yeah, and then you can have the file on your computer. Okay, so that's the app that we're going to be using. And the structure I'm going to follow in this talk is, first, I will introduce a use case. Like in what situation you would need to use this feature. Then I will introduce the feature, like a very fast introduction to the JavaScript feature. If you cannot hear me, just let me know. And then we'll see some examples of code. Yeah, it's lots of code here. So the first use case is when you want to expand an iterable, like when you have an array or a map or an object. And one example of this use case is when you want to add properties that you calculate in your front end to elements that you get from the back end. Like let's say in the test in the example I show, I have all the tests coming from the back end. So I get the results in JSON, but then I want to add elements in my front end to display or to for styling or something like that. And this is very important when you are using a reactive wire service, because in reactive wire service, you cannot change or add properties to the elements on the fly. You might get that error when you try to do that. So the feature we can use here is called spread syntax, is the 3 dots. And maybe if you are very advanced, this is very simple for you, but I have been working with Apex developers that are transitioning to Lightning Web Components, and they say, like, I really don't understand what the 3 dots is. And it's a very used feature in JavaScript, basically. With this one, you can add all the elements that you have in an object to another object, or from an array to another array, for example. The example that I'm going to be using is in the app. I'm going to use it here because I am adding this, the type. I am adding this property in the front end. And I am also adding the class that you see here, the red color. I am adding it in the front end as well, in JavaScript. So if I go back like 5 years ago or 4 years ago, this is the code that I would have done, like when I moved from Apex just to JavaScript or to Lightning Web Components. So then the things that I know are force, and I know how to copy properties and values, and I know how to add values, yeah? So this would be my beginner code, let's say. So I'm using a wire service, calling a controller in my Apex class. Then in here, I'm copying each element of my object, the property and the value, all of them. And I'm doing this because I want to add 2 elements, 2 properties, that is the class and the type. And I am using also another thing that I know how to do in Apex, that is, I am using two arrays, one that contains all the test results, and one that is going to contain the display test results when I filter. So what I'm doing is I'm going through the for, and on each test result that has all the properties added, I am just adding the element to the second array. So how can I change this to use a spread syntax? I can change this, very simple, to do just this. Using the 3 dots, I am doing exactly this, copying all the properties and values to the new object. And I can also use spread syntax here. Instead of copying each element, pushing to the new array, I can just use the 3 dots on the array, and it's going to copy all the elements to the new array. The second use case is operation on arrays. This is very used in Lightning Web Components because basically we are just manipulating data and showing data or changing data or something like that. The example that I have here is when you need to filter data according to some conditions, when you need to add properties to each element that you have in an array, or when you need to calculate totals, for example, yeah? The feature that we can use is arrow functions. And this is, I think, one of my favorites because the old style of defining functions, yeah, I mean, it's clear, but this is kind of cool and shorter. So in this case, you use an arrow to define the functions. And basically what you have to the left of the arrow is the parameters. And what you have to the right of the arrow is the function body. It's nothing like fancy, but just shorter. And arrow functions go hand to hand with higher order functions. And some of the ones we are going to see are just 3, filter, map, and reduce. Filter creates a new array with all the elements, and you have to pass a function, and that function is going to be applied to each element of the array, and the result, if the test pass, is going to be sent to the second array. Map is going to create a new array, and it's going to be populated with the results of calling the function that you send on each element of the array. And reduce is going to give you a single value that is going to be calculated applying a reducer function on each element of the array. The example in here, I am using it because I am filtering the data here when I select the type. And I am also using it here. This is the calculated total time of the elements that you are seeing on the screen when you filter. Okay, the Edith newbie some years ago would have done this. I would have just use a for, and if the current element selected type is the same as the one that they selected, I will add the element to the display array. And if they selected all, I will just move all the elements. How can we change this with filter? filter is going to take the condition or the test element, the test function that is going to be applied to each element, and is going to copy the ones that pass to the display array. So if you can see, all of these kind of lines of code are going to be moved just to one line of code. The second example would be map, using map. And if you remember, this is the first example that we have. We are copying all the properties and values and adding 2 new properties. So this can be a refactor still more. If I refactor this one, I can use map like this. So map is going to take each element of the array, which basically is implementing a for for each element, and it's going to apply the function that I'm providing. The function is going to just give me all the properties and values and add 2 new properties to this one. So when you jump and you see this initial code to this one like looks more JavaScript style. I mean, the first one works, but the second one using JavaScript functions, yeah, is more, I would say, more modern. And the third one is using reduce. This is a very, very simple example of reduce. So I have seen very complex examples, but this one is one nice one. The first one is the beginner's code that I would have used. It's just using an accumulator and adding the runtime of the current element to the total. So if I can use reduce, I translate that to just one line of code. The values start in 0, and I have the accumulator, that is the previous value. I have the test result, that is the current element of the array. And I'm just doing exactly what I have here, adding the runtime to the previous value and accumulating the value. And this brings me to something a bit controversial. And it's when not to use reduce. I mean, you might have a different opinion about this one, but I have seen using reduce in a very, very complex scenarios without comments, without nothing, and like done by very experienced JavaScript developers. And the problem is not that you are not smart, you don't know the syntax, and you don't have lots of experience. The problem is that you might have a team of junior developers around you. And in my mind, coding is not owning the code yourself. It's like caring about the team that you have around and knowing what needs that team have. Like maybe they have a need of maybe training to know how to use the functions, or maybe it's better not to use that function in a specific context because that might make things more complex and more difficult to maintain later. So yeah, I think at some point, maybe the senior or the lead developer should decide when not to use the functions that we have seen. I think there are some cases when reduce is the best choice, but documenting and semantic variable means naming the variables according to what you are going to do in the function itself. Yeah, that can help mitigating readability. And this is because in reduce this is very simple. Like you can see what it's doing here. But there are some reduce can be used not just to accumulate. It can be used to very complex things, and you don't know what you are going to be doing there. Whereas in here, if you use map, you know that something is going to be translated to something else. If you use filter, you know that there is a condition that is going to be applied. But in map, you don't know what's going on there unless you document or you have the person around that wrote it. Okay, the third use case is conditional rendering or formatting. Some examples is when you need to display data in your Lightning Web Components in a different format to the one you get from the backend, or when you need to use a different CS class in your component depending on the values that you have on some variables. The feature we can use here is getters. And the get syntax, you define a property, and when you call the property, a function is going to be executed in the background and give you the result in a dynamic way. Yeah. An example of this is here. Imagine I give this to my client, and they come back and say, you know what? I don't like this. I want this format to be changed. And I also want you to calculate this dynamically. And if the runtime is greater than 10,000, put it in red because the runtime is too big. otherwise in green. Yeah, more or less like this. Yeah. So I would use a getter here, and the get for execution date is just going to call format date in my value and return the result to the Lightning Web component. For the CS class, I just can define the property in the class of the div, for example. And in this case, I'm going to return a red color if the total time is greater than 10,000, otherwise green color. And the fourth use case is reuse library. And this is one that is very simple to implement. But along my career, I have seen many cases where many developers just duplicate the code. It's like, I want the function, my colleague has it, but I just copied my Lightning Web component. I use the function again, and no reuse is found in Lightning Web components. But in this case, for example, when your team wants to use a JavaScript library that is available in internet, and you want to share it with everybody, or when you have noticed that you have duplicated code in several Lightning Web components. The feature we can use here is modules. A module is, let's say that is the way that JavaScript has to implement accessibility to the members of the file. Like in JavaScript or in Apex, we have private, public, protected, or not. But in JavaScript, they are starting to implement it, but isn't widely like very mature as the Apex one. So the way they do it is using modules. All the things that you have in your file is private unless you export it. And when another component wants to use that code, just imports it. Yeah. So in this case, I don't have like in the app an example because it's in the backend, but I have a code example. Remember the format date that we had in the getter. So imagine that I have this format in my Lightning Web component, and then I have a colleague that says, I want that same function. Can you share it with me? I wouldn't give this to that person, and that person copy paste to the Lightning Web component. What I would do is just to create a Lightning Web component that just has the JavaScript side, copy my function there, export my function in this with this syntax, and then maybe commit to Git, and the other person will retrieve it, and that person can use it using import like this. And then at the end, that person can just use the function like this. And the final use case is a sequence of asynchronous tasks that have to be performed one after another. Some examples is when you need to load a chart library and then draw the chart. At the beginning of my career, I was getting into many problems in like, asynchronous programming, because sometimes this concept wasn't well understood. And sometimes I wanted to do something, and before something else was there, and I got so many errors many times. Another example is when you want to save a record to Salesforce and then reload the information to display values that are calculated in formulas. So basically something that has to wait for something else in order to execute. The feature we can use here is promises. Promise is a way of JavaScript to implement asynchronous programming. And in a promise, you specify an object that is going to be called when a long computation finishes. So you have to specify two functions: one that is going to be executed when the when the computation succeeds, and one that is going to be called when the computation fails. Yeah. So I am using it an example in here because I need a library for the chart and for the module. And after the library, I need to get the data from Salesforce, from the backend. And finally, I want to draw the chart. So this is one of the examples that I would have used. Maybe first, I need to load the script of high charts. This is the main one. Then I need the module exporting, and then call my method in Salesforce in Apex to get the totals. And finally, draw the chart. Yeah. But can I do better than that? And yeah, I have to admit at the beginning of my journey, I was using promises in that way of chaining a lot. But now I don't use them at all, actually. So now I use async await and try catch. If you use async await, it's a special syntax to work with promises, but in my viewpoint, is a more comfortable way of doing it. If you use the keyword await, that makes JavaScript to wait until the promise settles and returns a result. If the promise fails, it's going to throw an error. So that's why we have to use try catch to catch the error. So these chain promises can be changed to this one. So you have to use async in the function and then await whenever you want the promise to wait until the next line is executed. So I think this is more like, it's more clearer to understand and kind of cleaner as well. Okay, some conclusions. I think it's normal when we made a transition from a programming language to another to use the constructs that you know, because why not? I mean, but reviewing the standard of ECMAScript, that is the one that is JavaScript is based on, can give us many useful features that we can include in our components. Well, I don't know you, but I think this is very subjective, but I think the features make for a more readable and modern code. I can see my code from 4 or 5 years ago, and I say, yeah, I was like very newbie, and my code now, it looks like more JavaScripty. And also, knowledge is power. I mentioned that some of the features might need like a big decision or a person to decide whether to use them or not. But I think if you know the features, you can decide when to use them or not. I have to admit, at the beginning of my career in Line Web Components, I was very even shy because people who were around me were advanced JavaScript developers, and they weren't very friendly, to be honest. So I was thinking, like, I can ask them, but they are very rude. I have to learn, and that transition is kind of very hard. So if you have some time to start like learning little by little JavaScript, and then just come and just decide when to use the features or not, and even jump in the code that advanced people did and just change it and refactor and show them that that you know. A way of knowing how to increase a good way to increase our knowledge is looking at examples. Basically, this is the way I started learning about these tips and tricks, and learning about other code that I saw in my career as well. And the standard continues evolving. In Salesforce, we have several releases per year. ECMAScript now also have releases. The newest one was in June in this year, and they included some features there. And some resources is, the second one is important because not all the features of ECMAScript can be used in Line Web Components. And this is a blog from Alba that he mentions which one is available or which one isn't, how to know which one. And the one that I used a lot at the beginning of my transition was the GitHub recipes. And there are so many good examples, and obviously it's created by, I think, Philippe and some other people from Salesforce. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Where can we find the deck with the presentation? Is there a link somewhere?
You can post the deck on our chatter group. So the group has a chatter group where we usually post the decks after. If you'd like, you can post it yourself or send it to one of us.
I will send it to Anna.
Thank you.
And you?
Yes. So, using those functions after Visual, for instance, is it only a matter of readability, or is there sort of improvements in performance or something like that?
I actually don't know the answer. I think someone else asked me that question. No, I don't know. Anybody knows here? No. You see, reduce is
a lot of things came in ES6 with more syntactic sugar, so just to make it easier to write. I don't think there were many performance improvements in there. I mean, you could write 4 loops and be fairly happy they were going to work the same, I think. as Edith said, the reduce is a funny one. Like the filter and the map make a lot of sense when you look at them first off. Reduces, you can look at them and go, like black magic when you get inside. But yeah, performance-wise, I don't think there's much difference.
Okay.
Any other questions needed on JavaScript? Who's using a lot? Can I ask you, who's using a lot of the ES6 stuff in their LWCs at the moment? Yeah. If people are not using the ES6 stuff, why not? Are they like just, or you're not using so much advanced JavaScript in the LWC? Okay. In that case, a big round of applause for Edith.
Thank you. Thank you.